I would like you to talk a little bit about how the year has been going for Havas Creative. What have been the good things, the not so good, the highlights, and the perhaps low points, or what's the balance you make at this point of the year?
So how's the year been for Havas Creative? Well, a lot better than last year. I think that's safe to say. I think, generally speaking, pretty well everywhere in the world, we've had a good year. I think the advertising or the marketing services industry is I think an early indicator, let's say. I mean, when things go bad, our industry feels it first, and when things start to return, our industry feels it first. And I think it's a good news, I would say, for the global economies that our businesses are feeling a lot more buoyant. I'd like to say it's just Havas, but I think that's true of the industry generally, a lot more buoyant. So this year, I think if somebody had told us last August that this August was going to be as good as it is, or this half of the year, let's say, has been as good as it is, I think we'd have been absolutely delighted, because it certainly felt very, very difficult last, at the end of H1 last year for all of us, I think. So this year's been good. In fact, in many markets, our biggest challenge is talent. We are finding in all of our big markets a real problem around finding talent. And it's an interesting question as to why. I mean, obviously part of the reason is the industry contracted and now it's expanding again, but it really is disproportionately difficult to find people. And we speculate, certainly in the UK, I'll be interested in your views in Spain, but in the UK, is that partly because we had a lot of non-UK people that worked in the industry in the UK, for example, and those people have gone back, whether they've gone back to Europe or back to places like Australia and New Zealand? An awful lot of Australian people would work in the industry in the UK, and those people haven't come back. I don't know, but certainly the big challenge, in a sense, it's a nice problem to have, but nevertheless, it's still a problem.
Yeah. But is the problem of finding young talent or every kind of talent? I mean, new people getting into the industry, or?
No. It's not right at the entry level. No, there's not a challenge there particularly. I mean, the challenge is more finding people with a certain degree of experience, let's say above 2 or 3 years. So people who you kind of want, if you win a pitch or something like that, or, you want to be able to plug somebody in straight away who can pick up a project and make stuff happen. Yeah. There's a real challenge in that space, and that's true here. That's true in Europe. That's true in the US. And what we're seeing as well is an awful lot of movement within the industry. So because, everybody to an extent is experiencing the same challenge. So therefore that's leading to quite a lot of movement. And I think also that's probably a reflection of some of the things we were just talking about, if you like, off camera. People have had a year and a half to think about their life, where they live. I mean, do they want to live in a city anymore? What do they want to do? Yeah. So all of, I think we're seeing a lot of very human factors working their way through the system, and I think that's still got some way to go. I mean, we're not through this thing yet. So so we'll see.
Yeah, and you see, and you think the advertising industry and agencies in particular are in a good or bad position when people make a balance about their lives and the how hard it is to combine family and work. And it's always been said that it's very difficult in advertising. And do you think that the industry is suffering, particularly in this moment, that maybe a lot of people is thinking about the style of life, the way of life, that the industry should think more about it?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different questions in there. Do I think that is a factor? I definitely think that's a factor. Do I think that the advertising industry is suffering more than other industries? I don't know. I mean, I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. And I'm sure it would be strange to me if other industries and people working in other industries weren't having their own version of those questions.
Yeah.
That said, I do think that, and by the way, we're also talking generalizations here. We're talking about an industry. And, you know, I think there's an awful lot of variation within any industry in terms of people's experiences of what their job and their working life is like. That said, I do genuinely think that we now, where are we now? You know, August 2021, I think that there's a possibility that the way we work will change. I mean, it already has changed. I mean, obviously, we've worked in a very different way for the past 18 months. The question is, what will that look like in the next 18 months? So everybody's talking about hybrid working. Certainly at Havas, that's something that we are going to experiment and are experimenting with. Mm-hmm. I do, though, think that anybody that kind of professes to be able to tell you what that will look like in 12 months' time or 24 months' time, take that with a pinch of salt. I mean, the thing that I would say with some certainty is we're going to work very differently now, September 2021, to how we worked in September 2019. And almost unimaginable change really has happened during that period. That said, what will September 2022 and 2023 look like? I think it's too early to say.
Yeah. Okay. Leaving aside for a moment the particular circumstances that we are going through this, and I know it's very difficult, but what are your ambitions and plans for Havas Creative? Where the company is now, and where you want it to be in, let's say, 5 years? What things need to go better? You have to have more of that, less of this. What's the track you have devised for the company?
Oh, goodness. I'm not going to attempt to answer 5 years, but I'll tell you what I think the key, what I think are the things that the factors that we believe will
put it 2 years if you want.
Yeah. The things that we think will drive the future success of our business, and I think, I'm afraid it might be a rather a boring answer, but I think actually, even though a lot has changed in terms of how we work, I do think that the fundamentals of what makes a great business haven't changed. So I'll answer that, then I can give you some specifics. I think the fundamentals of what make a great business is our businesses, all the businesses that are within Havas and all of our competitors, let's be clear, are basically consultancy businesses. I mean, we don't use that word typically. We use with agencies and things like that, but we're consultancy businesses. We are external consultants in areas of expertise. And in consultancy businesses, the determining factor between whether you're a great business or whether you're an average or a poor business is just two things. It's talent and it's culture. Can you get more than your fair share of the best people? And even more important than that, because that's a slightly subjective assessment, even more important than that, can you create a culture that enables your teams to outperform the competition? And I know that sounds kind of like obvious, and I think it is obvious, but it's true. And anybody that convinces themselves it isn't true is going to fail. And I think that makes our business, and I think it's what makes our business fascinating, which is it's a difficult but not complicated, essentially, our business. It's not a complicated business, but it's very difficult to do well. And it's certainly very difficult to do well across multiple territories, across multiple years. So the first thing to say is I think that continues to be absolutely the case. And smart businesses and successful businesses will continue to try and find ways to attract more than their fair share of the best people, and will continue to focus very hard on creating a culture that allows their teams to outperform. Because that's what culture is. Culture is the environment you create that allows your teams to outperform. Culture isn't Pilates at lunchtime or free fruit. It's an organizational environment that allows you to outperform. in terms of business sectors, so I think that will remain true. In terms of business sectors, I'll pick a couple, and so Havas, our village model at Havas, which is essentially, as I'm sure you're familiar, it's essentially the co-location of all of our capabilities. We've got a very big village in Madrid, for example, co-location of all of our capabilities in one building under a sort of unified leadership structure. That is I think that's always been a differentiating approach for us. And I think from what I see in the market right now, as I hesitate to say come out of the back of COVID, but hopefully come to the end of COVID, what we've seen in most territories is a significant increase in demands for integrated type solutions from clients. And I think our village model is ideally suited to deliver that. And we've seen far more interest in that space. And I think that's partly, I think that the sort of trite reason for that might be people say, well, that's because clients are looking to save money and therefore they're looking for integrated solutions for that reason. I don't think that that's necessarily fair. I think that an awful lot of what I have seen an awful lot of clients is they see their business changing dramatically. They see their consumers changing dramatically. And therefore, I think that they're asking themselves, if you like, rather broader questions in terms of what the type of solutions they need are. And therefore, it's just less obvious what kind of agency mix is the right mix for them. And therefore, I think agencies that are able to deliver more integrated solutions are obviously able to flex depending on as their business changes. And I think that is a key part of our model. So what we continue to want to try and do in all of our key strategic markets is have breadth of capability and depth of capability without too much overlap. We don't want too much replication. We want to be able to have strong businesses that can span the marketing services spectrum. And the final point, I mean, I can expand on this if there's areas you want to expand on. The final point that I would just call out that we've seen a significant increase growth, literally growth, and an increase in inquiries in is what we call CX, which is, which is the whole customer experience piece, everything from data, digital, customer journey planning, etc. And we've seen where we have strong businesses in that space, we see that whole market is expanding. We've seen the number of inquiries that come to us expanding, and we've seen our businesses growing quite dramatically where we've got strong capabilities. So we believe that will be a space that will really continue to thrive. And I think it's a sort of intuitively, it makes sense as we see more and more of our clients doing more and more of their business in the online space and the e-commerce space as we come off the back of the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's talk a little bit about you and your career, if you don't mind. And I would like you to explain why, how did you arrive to advertising? Because as far as I know, you studied, you're an engineer by education.
Yes, that's right.
How did it came that you ended up in advertising?
Well, so the honest answer for that is that in the UK, when we're 18, we do exams called A levels. So when I chose which A levels I was going to do, I was always quite an academic. I was always one of those people that was kind of just quite an academic person at school, but I chose the A levels that I thought I could do well in with the least amount of work. Is the honest answer. And somewhat weirdly, you might say, I decided that was going to be maths and physics. Now, a lot of people might find that peculiar, but it didn't. I didn't have to write any essays. I didn't have to read any books. So maths and physics. Now, once you've done maths and physics, that fairly limits your options as a degree. So then I ended up doing a degree in engineering. And in fact, my first job, I was actually sort of sponsored, sort of employed through university by a large manufacturing business called Pilkington Glass, who still exist in the north of England. So I spent a year with them. Other people go traveling, go to Bali, go to wherever, Southern Europe. I spent a year in factories in near Manchester. I then did a 4-year degree doing engineering, and the answer is, by the end of that 5-year period, the one thing I knew with absolute certainty was that I didn't want to work in a factory and I didn't want to be an engineer. So essentially, there was no great science to it. I think I just chose something that was as far away as I could imagine from a factory and from engineering, and that was advertising. So that was it, really.
Yeah. How the opportunity came about? You send your CV to agencies?
Yeah. I just thought, okay. I mean, I thought I quite like advertising. Seems interesting. It seems fun. It's not a factory. And so I just applied to loads of places. And by the way, anybody who's listening and is interested in getting a job in our industry, the single most important thing you can do, still, it was true then, it is true now, is apply to lots of places. It is a numbers game. So that's what I did. And eventually somebody offered me a job.
Yeah, that was BBH.
Actually, I worked for a year at a company which doesn't exist anymore, called Still Price Lintas, and Lintas was formerly Unilever's in-house advertising agency, and they, I think, were merged eventually with Low, perhaps, something like that.
Yeah, anyway. Low Lintas, actually, yes.
Yes. So I did that for a year. I worked on, proper kind of, old-fashioned FMCG brands, frozen peas and fish fingers and things like that. And then I moved to BBH. Yeah. So after a year, and at that point, so this is now in the mid-90s, I suppose. And at that point, BBH were kind of like the best agency in the world, I suppose. And at a point when the heyday of the 60-second director's cut advert, and Levi's and Audi, these iconic campaigns that we'd still recognize now. It's important to say, by the way, I didn't work on any of those. I mean, I worked at BBH, but honestly, the stuff I did was rubbish. I played part in BBH's success.
You work on the boring clients.
I worked on the boring clients. I worked on the boring clients. I worked on the work that they never put on their reel. But
surely the work that made money.
Yes, probably. I worked on the clients that made money, exactly. That's what I tell myself anyway. So
but anyway, a special place to be at that moment, in any case.
Without question. And I mean, BB&H, Bartle, Bogle and Hegarty were still absolutely in the business, running the business, three of the most iconic names, I suppose, in the industry, even now. Well, not even now, they will be as long as the industry exists, I think. Not just because it was a great agency, and it was a great agency, but they're kind of the rigor, the rigor of how they approach the business, I still think is second to none in my experience, certainly in terms of the London agencies that obviously I'm a bit more familiar with. I think second to none. I think that Hegarty clearly is still a world-renowned creative, but Nigel Bogle, in terms of his, the rigor and the intellectual rigor that he brought to account management, which is often sort of a bit dismissed as a sort of bad characters. And John Bartle, I think one of the fathers really of how we approach effectiveness even today. I think he was one of the leading thinkers in terms of properly putting rigor behind effectiveness models. So it was a great agency. Like I said, none of which was anything to do with me.
Anyway, and then you went to Fallon to work still in account management.
So I joined Fallon in London. So Fallon was a big successful agency in the US. They had a big head office in Minneapolis, and they opened an agency in London with five partners. So this is late 90s, and I was one of the first people they hired. I wasn't a partner. I was still very young, really. I was joined as an account director, basically. And so I went from BBH, which was just this machine. It was just this incredibly well-run, on all possible regards, business. And I joined this startup, which was like all startups. It was wild and crazy and creative, and and I often think that the difference between the two businesses was like sitting at BBH. It was like sitting in the back of a kind of a Bentley or something like that, and Fallon was like sitting on the back of a motorbike. And so both, you can be doing 60 miles an hour on both, but your experience on the back of the motorbike at 60 miles an hour is completely different to your experience in the back of the Bentley. And really that was the difference.
Yeah. Okay. And then you went to Gray, and that was not only different agency, but a different role too, because you started managing in a managing position.
Yes.
How did you have fear? How did you feel about it? What did you feel it was interesting to change sides in a way?
So I got hired as from Fallon, which at that point again was this kind of hot creative startup. And I got hired as part of a new management team. There was 5 of us. We all started pretty well the same day at Gray in London. And Gray was the unfixable agency. I mean, Gray in London certainly had this terrible reputation. The agency was kind of dying. It was shrinking. There was nothing positive to say about it at all, really. And our job was to transform this business. And the short version of the story is within 6 months. So I joined as the managing director. So there was a CEO, I worked for the CEO, and then there was 4 of us worked for him. And within 6 months, my boss, he'd left under difficult, let's say, circumstances. Brush over that. And that left the 4 of us. And then after about 6 years, so, for 6 years, I was still the managing director. A succession of CEOs came and went. I was passed over for that job several times. The other people that I joined with had, by and large, left to other jobs. And it's important to say that the people that I joined with went on to absolutely stellar careers. I mean, they are still very, very successful, big names in our industry, regionally and possibly globally. And I stayed. And it's an interesting discussion as to why, but I think I stayed because I didn't have the courage to leave. But the problem is, after 6 years, the agency was still just as bad a business as it had been when I joined. And the problem is, if you come in as part of the solution, and after 6 years, it hasn't changed, you're not part of the solution anymore, you're part of the problem. And so at that point, I was pretty clear that I'd screwed my career. I mean, I didn't know what to do. I was stuck. I joined as part of this rock star change team. One of them had got fired, the others had gone on to brilliant jobs, and I was there, and the agency was still shit. And I had another new boss, so they were pretty clear they weren't going to promote me. So what do I do? And that was a real low point for me. I mean, I really thought I'd screwed my career. I mean, I couldn't really see a way out, to be honest, because I'd got to the point where I wasn't really employable. Why would anybody offer me a job? So the short version is I had a degree of leverage anyway. I won't bore you with why, but I persuaded them to let me go to Harvard, to the AMP program at Harvard, the Advanced Management Program, which is an 8-week program in Boston. And they, even though they didn't want me to be the CEO, they wanted me to stay, at least for the short term, as a sort of part of a transition, because I knew how the business worked. Even though I hadn't changed the business, I knew how it worked. So I signed a year. I said, well, look, I'll sign it, guaranteed to stay for at least another year to help this transition if you'll let me have this 8 weeks at Harvard. So off I went to Harvard. And it's no exaggeration, it changed my life. So this is a very long answer to your question. You might have to edit this.
No, it's right. No, go on.
That's a long and rambling answer.
No.
But anyway, Harvard changed my life. I mean, there is no question about that. And it didn't change my life for any of the reasons that people might think when you read books about Harvard. Even though I thoroughly enjoyed it. And as I said at the start, I'm quite an academic person, so I enjoyed the process of learning and I learned a lot. But the reason it changed my life was you leave behind everything. You leave behind your job and your family and your friends. It's 6 days a week. It's 14 hours a day. Your life is totally regimented for 8 weeks when you're in Harvard. You're told where to sleep, where to work, where to sit when you're in class, when to eat. And you walk into class and there's 80 other people in the class. You have your name tag. You're told where to sit. And when you walk into this room, nobody knows who you are. Nobody's heard of you. Nobody cares. Nobody's heard of the company you work for, probably. And you suddenly realize that you can be anybody you want to be. So all that stuff that holds us back is just bullshit stories in our own head. They're just stories we tell ourselves. There's stories we tell ourselves about, I'm a failure because Gray's still a failure and I've gone through this 6 years and woe is me. Nobody cares. You could tell them you're the most successful CEO there's ever been. They're like, okay, great, yeah. So am I. And actually, it's an astonishing, I just found it, it's so obvious, but it's hard to do. And I found it an incredibly liberating experience. I don't know, do you know the story Gulliver's Travels? Is that a story that's a known story?
Yes, of course.
So Gulliver visits this country full of the Lilliputians, who are the little people. Yeah. And they try and tie him down, the Lilliputians, and they hammer the ropes into the ground to hold him down. Yeah. And I think that the Lilliputians are the stories we tell ourselves. Okay, we're all tethered down by these stories. We're held. So much of what holds us back is things we tell ourselves, our own fears, our ego, our previous experiences, whatever it is. And these, and I think for a period at Harvard, I kind of pulled myself free, pulled the little pegs out of the ground, and it's liberating. And of course, when you come back, they set to work again, hammering their little pegs in. But I never quite went back to that person. There was definitely a permanent change. So, and a bit of that is sort of luck in terms of timing. I think, in my case. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then you stayed for another lengthy period. I did.
Well, I did. But again, the short version, without boring you with the labyrinthine politics of WPP in the 10 years ago in London, but essentially what happened was shortly after my return, within sort of 5-6 months, let's say, or I can't remember exactly. Of my return, 6-9 months. So before my year was up, before my period of, I'm going to do my year, then I'm going to go, I got made CEO in London. And that's because of a little bit of good fortune. Maybe you make your own luck, however. And I got made CEO. And I think the one thing that I was certain of at that point was I definitely didn't have a clear plan. If you asked me now, what do you think you need to do to build a great agency? I could tell you what I think. By the way, it's only my opinion. People might disagree with me, but at least I have an opinion and I've tried it. Yeah. And I can say, well, I have tried it and this kind of worked in the past. But then I didn't. But what I did have is I was absolutely, totally clear on two things. One, and this is the BBH thing, One, I was very clear that an agency is run by a team. It's not run by an individual. And we needed to really, really, really invest in ensuring we had a team at the top of the agency. And I'm always a believer, and I think it's the BBH, the thing I learned BBH, strategy, creative, account management are the trio. So I was determined that we have that trio at the top of the business. One, so how do we, and it's not just individuals, it's team. That was one. And the second thing that I was clear on was I definitely was determined that we weren't going to make the mistakes that we'd already made in the preceding 6 or 7 years, either mistakes I'd made or mistakes that, in my opinion, I'd seen other people make. And that's only my opinion, but, as the CEO, you're basically paid to have an opinion and then do something with it, with it. So I was determined that we weren't going to do that. And so we set about really being very iconoclastic. Our view was, well, Gray's a shit agency. We've been put in charge of an agency, but the agency we've been put in charge of is shit. I mean, it was. And so we kind of, I think, felt like we had nothing to lose. Which, I mean, in reality, of course, we did, but we sort of approached it a bit like that, and so we were very iconoclastic in terms of how we approached it, yeah, I mean, I think within sort of 3 or 4 years, maybe 3 years, we were one of the best agencies in London, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any lesson or any tips? Because as far as my experience goes, only as a journalist, not as a manager of an agency or whatever, is that it is really, really difficult to change an advertising agency, to change the culture of an advertising agency. Many, many of them try, and almost invariably they fail. Well, you cannot change a company. And you did that at Gray. What do you think was the secret or the crux, the core point of the change? What was the reason of the success in that strategy? So
I think you're right. I think people do think what you just said, and I think they're wrong. But I think that it's something that people repeat, and I hear people repeat it regularly. And I get asked, if I'm speaking, I get asked it all the time. I think that culture is difficult to change, but actually you can, if you go about it in the right way, change it quite quickly. And I think that requires a number of things. First of all, I think you have to understand what culture is. And culture within any organization, public sector, private sector, big or small, culture is the defining experience you have as an individual within that organization. I mean, without question. A lot of organizations, though, are in denial about what their culture is, which is a whole separate question. A lot of organizations don't even know what the culture is. They don't know. And for a lot of organizations, it's got nothing at all to do with what they say the culture is. You go to the website and they tell you all these things, and you get in the organization, it's no relation at all. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And so we were clear, I think, that the thing that we needed to do was to create a culture that allowed us to outperform. And culture, I think, a good way of thinking about what culture is culture ultimately in any team or in any organization. Culture is the behavior of the leaders. The thing that most clearly defines the behavior of the organization is how the leaders of the organization actually behave. It's got very little to do with what they say. It's got everything to do with what they do. And so that's why you can change culture quickly. But the problem is, I think a lot of people honestly aren't prepared to do the things that they need to do to change. So one of the ways, I think, if you think about, you let's say you and me now, we go and join a new, doesn't have to be an agency, any business, okay? And we say, okay, this business really needs to change. It really needs to change. And you walk in and the people in the organization know that. Virtually nobody in an organization is in denial about the actual current condition of the business. Nobody at Gray thought that Gray was the best agency in London. One of the problems was they just thought it never could be. So they go, yeah, we're not the best, because everybody keeps trying, and we're just Gray, and it's fine. So the first thing I think you have to do as a leader is you have to make people believe not just that change is desirable. That's really easy. People go, do you think we should change? Yeah, change would be great. But you have to make them believe that it's actually possible, and that it's going to happen to them, and it's going to happen quickly. So I think the first thing to do in change is to imagine that you're sort of tethered to a post, and that post is hammered into the ground. And the first thing you have to do before you can go anywhere, so before you start worrying about direction and visions and missions, first thing you've got to do is you've got to free yourself from the post. So you have to just shake, kick, scream, fight to get free And one of the ways for doing that, for example, is environment is a very, very powerful determinant of organizational culture. You can walk into any organization and you can tell an awful lot about the culture from how it organizes, how it literally uses its environment. So for example, change where and how people sit, move offices, change your workflow process. If you do a weekly management, change absolutely everything, no matter how small, that relates back to the behaviors you had before. And some of those things might end up being dumb ideas. And some of the things we did were dumb ideas, but just change your mind. People are scared to change their mind, thinking, well, that didn't work, we'll go back. But I think the change isn't a soft, squishy thing. Change is a hard, physical thing. And if you want to change a culture, you have to take hard physical actions, and that's what you can do. So the first thing is you kind of imagine culture like concrete. You know, when you pour it, it's wet. Over time, it sets. If you want to reset that, you have to smash it, and that's what it is like with culture. Then, once you've smashed it away, you can reshape the mold and you can begin to set the new culture. But it's for sure it's possible. And I think it's not just possible, but I mean, you can't change an organization without changing the culture.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, let's go back to the the path of things, to your path through the industry, and then you went to Havas. Why it was attractive for you to jump to this agency? And how do you feel? What do you feel is your role as a global CEO? What's your everyday job, holding that title in your business card or whatever?
So that's a really good question. I hate it when people ask me when people say, what do you actually do? So two questions in there. Why did I join Havas? Well, by that point, as I suppose you pointed out, I'd been at Grey for 12 years. I mean, that's just felt like quite a long time. Mm-hmm. And an opportunity came along at Havas. Havas it's a very different sort of business. You know, I mean, Grey was within WPP. By the way, I have no issues with WPP, but I'd worked within that company for quite a long time as well. So we're a different sized, different shaped, different ownership structure holding company, which I thought was really interesting. At that point, Havas's situation in the UK wasn't great, to put it mildly, but I looked at the business and thought, it really is a bit of a mess in the UK at the moment, but I could see within that there was real potential to do something completely different beyond just advertising. Bear in mind that up to that point, I had worked exclusively in creative agencies. And, you know, within Havas, within the role that I took at Havas, initially within Europe and then globally, we have creative agencies, but we have a whole array of different types of businesses as well. And I thought that was just a really interesting learning opportunity. And I also felt like that was the way the world was going, which I think we touched on that earlier. I think that's turned out to be true. I can't remember your second question. Oh, the second part was what do I do? What do I do every day?
What do you do every day as a global CEO?
I think the vast majority of my job is people. You know, my job is about ensuring, like I said earlier in the interview, our businesses really are culture and talent. And how do we ensure that we've got more than our fair share of the right people? And how do we ensure that we've got an environment that allows those people to perform at their best? And so a vast amount of my job is that. And that's about, now, of course, in doing that, you know, that's about the people that work for me. That's about understanding what our clients want from us. That's about understanding what prospective clients via those clients directly or via consultants want from us. It's about trying to organize the businesses we have, because we have a lot of there's a lot of individual agencies. I mean, agency networks are like federations. Okay, I imagine our businesses are like the states in the USA. Each of them has their own culture, their own leader, their own, their own entity, their own economy, but they sit within this sort of federal environment. And I sort of see myself as the federal environment. Which are the bits that we are going to have in common? And when we do need to work together, how are we going to organize ourselves in order for us to be able to work together effectively? That's a bigger and bigger part of what I do. So it's about ensuring, I suppose, that we have more than our fair share of the best people. It's ensuring we have a culture globally and locally that allows our teams to outperform. And it's about determining I think one of the things with leadership is there's always an endless amount of things you could be spending your time doing, all of which seem sort of sensible. That's true for me, and that's true of the people that work for me. And one of the most important things that I think I try and do is ensure that everybody might find their own way. They have to find their own way to an extent to make their businesses succeed. But what I try and do is ensure that we all align on a relatively small number of most important tasks that we're all going to focus on. And if we do those tasks well, then our businesses, more times than not, will perform well. And that's not, again, that's none of this is that complicated. It's just difficult to do well. And, we're very clear what those tasks are. Those tasks, and where necessary, I will work with leaders to help them. If they're struggling with some of those, how do we help them? So, so our businesses, virtually all of our growth, virtually in a normal year, this year's a weird year, but in a normal year, virtually all of our growth, virtually all of our competitors' growth comes from winning pitches. So we want to grow. So we need to ensure we learn the skills we need to learn and have the people and have the culture to win pitches. You only grow, though, if you also have happy clients. So in really simple terms, our businesses win pitches and have happy clients. Now, that's not all that matters, because you've got a whole load of other things. In order to do those two things, you have to then have a whole load of other things that you're doing really well, like having understanding what the culture in your businesses is and how your people that work for you feel. So you work your way down the chain that way. But at the end of the day, if you have happy clients and you're winning pitches, and if you have those two things, then you're doing a whole lot of other things well. And conversely, if you do a whole lot of other things well, the output will be you will have happy clients and win pitches. You can approach it from either perspective. But making sure people are clear what really matters.
Okay. Well, changing the subject. Now there's a lot of talk within the industry and outside the industry too, in the whole of the business world and the sport world and anywhere really, about diversity and equity. And you have stated that diversity and social mobility are the key factors of the future health of the creative industry. Why do you think so?
Well, I think that. I think there's two halves to that. My answer to that question. The first is I think that we should, as an industry, I've said this several times, we need to be making sure we've got more than our fair share of the best people. And I do think that in a lot of societies around the world, I think that there's whole chunks of society that aren't coming, either don't feel welcome, don't know about, or that we are excluding from coming and working in our businesses. And so, so I think we have a moral and societal imperative to resolve that. But I also think we have a sort of enlightened self-interest in doing that, because there's a whole load of people that we're just not talking to, reaching, and who aren't coming and working for us. And it's not just about finding, if you like, group underrepresented in the sense of our industry. It's not just about finding groups and us employing those people, once they come and work for us, we want to make sure that we've got cultures and environments where everybody, no matter who they are, no matter what their background, can come and thrive. And I think that's a journey that we have to go on. I think this is a challenge our societies are all wrestling with in their own way. But we too are doing that. So we had a meeting, a half-yearly meeting around that this morning. And so one of the things that we're doing as part of our business planning process for 2022, I said a moment ago that, we identify a number of key KPIs that each of outside of finance, of course, in business planning, you talk about finance, but we have KPIs that dashboards, if you like, that all our leaders are asked to report on, and they have been in the past being client satisfaction, staff satisfaction, new business, and where relevant awards. To that, we've added D&I. So we've set ourselves some metrics. Ultimately, for me, it's about us changing the shape of our workforce to better represent the societies that they're within, and we want to measure that. We don't just want to know the things people say they're doing. We ultimately want to measure the outcomes. So that's something that will be in the KPIs going forward. So, and I think it's not only is it the right thing to do, I think it'll make us better businesses.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, you have written a book about leadership that obviously is an issue that interests you. Why did it start to interest you? How did it came? And why did you decide to write about it? And what has been the experience of being an author, a published author?
So the reason that I wrote it was because I was asked to do a presentation about 4 years ago. I was asked to do a presentation on leadership and to some graduates or something. And like a lot of people, when they're asked to do a presentation, I thought about it about 2 days beforehand. I thought, I better think about what I'm going to say. And at about the same time, I discovered that I was one of 3 people that had been asked to do this same presentation. Two sort of very high profile clients. And I thought, oh, blimey, this is suddenly, not only have I got to do this presentation, this is suddenly competitive. I've got to try and find something to say that they aren't going to say. So anyway, I did the presentation. I thought, that was quite interesting. And then I got home and I thought, well, I wonder if I kind of quite like that. I wonder if there's a book in that. I mean, that's literally what I thought. And I thought, well, either there's an article, a long paper, or a book. I don't know whether it's 2,000 words or 50,000 words. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write 10,000 words. See if I can write 10,000 words. Yeah. When I've written 10,000 words, I'm going to go and try and find somebody who knows what they're talking about in publishing and ask them whether it's worth persevering with. And essentially that's what I did. And the answer was yes. So then I finished it basically. I mean, it's a very rewarding thing to do. And it's not just rewarding, but by the way, it's not financially rewarding. Let's be clear about that. It's interesting because the writing. I think I listened to somebody talking about the importance of being able to write the other day, and they talked about the better you are able to write, the better you are able to think. So writing is kind of like organized thought, because we all have thoughts in our head all the time. Okay, we'll have some idea, and I've done it in this book. You ask me a question, and I'll think, okay, I've got a view on that, but it takes me a little while to kind of structure my thoughts and be able to say it in a kind of a coherent way that I think you've got a chance of understanding what I mean. And that's what writing does. Writing is about taking the thought in your head and being able to express it in a coherent, hopefully engaging way that somebody else will read, enjoy, and understand. And I think that's a great way of organizing your ideas, your philosophy, what you believe. And so I think the process of doing it, which is not why I did it, at all. But the process of doing it has, without question, clarified my views on leadership in a way that there's no way I would have done had I not written it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, one of the views is that, at least as far as I have read, that you have on leadership is that the 3 top qualities for a leader are empathy, trust, and humility. Well, what do you think so? You can explain it briefly. And how do you think you score on the 3 of them?
Well, do you know, you sent these questions through, and I looked at those and I thought, did I say that? Because I definitely, I mean, I might have said that. I'm not doubting that I said it, but I don't know when I said it, and I definitely don't think I think that anymore. So,
okay.
I definitely wouldn't have said those are the 3 things.
If you, maybe I read it on LinkedIn, or if you want,
maybe I don't know.
We can drop the question if you.
No, yeah, well, no. I just read it and thought, wow. I mean, really, I'm sure I could do better than that.
Yeah,
they just feel a bit. I mean, I'm sure I don't doubt you. Maybe I did say them, but
no, I don't know. I'm quite sure that I can't remember where now. I absolutely. If you don't feel like answering it, just let's drop it. It doesn't matter.
I mean, I can think of some others if you like, but I am. They just feel, one of the reasons about them is if I was really going to try and answer that question, I'd go, God, they're such 3 boring, uninteresting answers. They're the sort of answers that when other people give them, I go, oh, for God's sake, do better than that.
No, it's not being boring at all.
No, I'm not criticizing you. I'm criticizing myself because I probably did say it at some point. I think that leaders, I suppose what I think about leadership is that I don't think there are 3 qualities that are more important than others. And I'm not saying that as a cop-out, because I will have a go at answering the question. But what I think about leadership is that what we're told and we're taught is that there is a way of being a leader, and you've got to go on training programs and train and to business schools and the right school and all this kind of thing to understand what it is. And I think anybody can be a leader. And if anybody can be a leader, that means there isn't a sort of personality type, a certain type of personality that's better than others. And there isn't a certain way of going about it. So it's not that I don't think empathy or trust or humility are important. Sure. I mean, yeah, great. They're all perfectly reasonable things. I mean, who wouldn't want to be those things? Yes, you would. But there's a lot of other things as well that you could also be, or you could be instead and still be an effective leader. I think the more that in a sense, the reason I rail against it is that the more that we try and define it in some sort of little box, the more that we actually exclude people from believing that they can lead. And what we want to be able to do is we want to make, for me, anybody that has people they're responsible for is a leader. That means, in Europe, there's millions of people in leadership positions, but they don't think of themselves like that. Society doesn't think of themselves like that. And often the people they work for don't think of them like that. And what we all need, what we've seen off the back of the pandemic, is we need more better leaders everywhere. We know that for sure. So what we need to make people do is understand what leadership is and make them believe they too can lead. So I think for me, the one thing that is absolutely I think if there's one thing that's absolutely indispensable, you cannot lead without, is getting stuff done. Leadership is about movement. Leadership is the movement of a group of people from a defined place in the present to a different and clearly defined place in the future. It's the journey between those 2 points. Leadership is not the defining of the end points, although you do need to do that, but that's not leadership. Leadership is the journey between the 2. You only get between the 2 by getting stuff done. And I think so many leaders essentially fail through the inability to get between those 2 points, the inability, the unwillingness to get stuff done. So in the book, I because we joked about the fact that I like maths, I wrote an equation. I said leadership impact is clarity times action. And I wrote it as a bit of a joke at first. I thought, well, that's quite funny. And the reason I wrote it is because I said, therefore, if action equals 0, You can be as brilliant, your strategy can be as brilliant as you like, but if your action is zero, your impact is zero. So that's kind of why I wrote it. And I think it's a powerful point to make, by the way. But the more that I think about it, the more that I actually think there's something in it, because it has more depth than maybe I gave it credit for initially, because that is, for me, they are the two most important words for a leader: clarity. And that's not just being clear yourself, what is my strategy, for example, but being able to be clear with others. There's no point only you knowing if nobody else knows. So you do need that, but then multiplied by action. And the reason I like it is because it says, even if your clarity, so your strategy or whatever, is imperfect, which, by the way, it will be inevitably imperfect, even if it is imperfect, if you're acting, you're still creating impact. And I think those, if I always say to people, if you remember two words: clarity and action.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you have a few minutes?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you have mentioned the post-pandemic world, and there's been much talk about being a different world from the pre-pandemic situation, and also we as human beings being different from what we were before the pandemic arrived. Do you feel so? Do you feel like the world will be different? And do you feel a different person from pre-pandemic?
That's a good question. I think I don't know whether I feel like a different person, but I think possibly in a way, maybe we all are. And what I think is that we as humans, we are very bad, I think, at looking at long-term trends. We're very good at short-term. We're very bad at long-term, which is why climate change, for example, is such a massive problem for us, because we're really bad at things that have long cycles. And I think what we've seen, and we will see now, is huge changes in society and in people and in politics as a consequence of the pandemic. But I think those cycles are big cycles. They're kind of mega cycles. So we're going to, a bit like after the financial crash. Okay, so the short term stuff, and then it seems like in the short term, oh, okay, we've all kind of just about got through it. It's horrible in 2010, and by sort of 2012, it feels like, oh, maybe we've survived. But actually, you feel, even now, we're only starting to really feel those big swell-like waves as a consequence of that. And I think that's what's going to happen with the pandemic. I think it's going to affect it, I'm not going to say everything, but only, huge areas of our society, from global supply chains, people, how we manufacture things, where we manufacture things, how we approach work, how we think about each other, how we think about medicine, how we think about our health. I mean, all sorts of things that we can't predict. I think it's going to hugely change, but I think these are changes that could take, some of this will be generational. I mean, the kids who was, my kids are 16 and 18. So, 16 and 18, kids that have spent essentially 2 years out of school in their bedrooms. These are things that are going to stay with them for the rest of their life. And how will that change how they think about their own kids and their kids' education and politics and what matters to them? We don't know. But it will without doubt, historians in 100 years will look back at the 2030s and they'll say, look at the effects of the pandemic.
Okay. Thank you. I would like, we do podcasts here at our magazine, and you're doing them too.
I'm doing what, sorry?
Podcasts.
Postcards?
No, podcasts.
Podcasts. Oh yes, podcasts.
Yeah,
podcast.
Sorry
yes,
for the pronunciation.
Yeah, no. Sorry. Yeah, yes, podcasts. Second series is just live now. Yes.
what about the experience? How do you, what do you find it funny or interesting or enjoyable?
I find it very enjoyable, actually. It's really, you asked about what, you asked about the book, and I sort of talked a bit about writing the book. But one of the things that writing the book has enabled me to do is to do all sorts of things that I wouldn't have done had I not written it. So I get to meet people, and I get to speak to people, and all sorts of things that I wouldn't have done otherwise. And I think the podcast is one of those. So, I've met all sorts of interesting people from sports stars, sports leaders, political leaders, artistic directors, politicians. So it's been fascinating, and it's also very interesting listening to other people. Honestly, talk about leadership. Everybody's got their own views, and I think that's great. I've got a really strong view on leadership, but I don't think that mine's the only view, and nor do I think mine's the only way. I just think this is my way. And the one thing I would say to anybody is, I think what is most important in the context of leadership is not that you agree with me, although I'd like you to. But what matters most is that you're clear what your leadership philosophy is. And I think if I think back to 2010, when I did become CEO of Grey, I like I say, I sort of didn't have one. I sort of made it up as I went along, and like I said, I sort of pretty basically just said I'm at least not going to try and make the same mistakes I did in the past. But I think that people need to develop their own sense of how they want to lead. And Clive Woodward, who is a very Sir Clive Woodward, who's a very well-known sports coach in the UK. So he was head of the British Olympic director of sport at the British Olympics in 2012, and he was coach of the England rugby team when they won the World Cup 5 or 6 years before that. So he's a very well-known coach in the UK, and he talks about learning. So I think his superpower, and he would say this, I think, as well, is his willingness and his desire to always learn. He says, I'll jump on a plane anywhere in the world and go and talk to anybody, any kind of coach in any area, not just have to be sport. If I think I can learn something from them that I can then go and apply. And I do think that some of the most impressive people that I've ever met are people that are really fast learners. And it's not the same as being clever or academic or anything like that. I don't mean learning, maths. I just mean being able to see what's going on, understand what's going on, assimilate that, and work out what you yourself are going to take and do as a consequence. And that's a really powerful thing in a new business context. Sorry, in a business context, and a really powerful thing in the context of business like ours, that is always so quick. Our cycles are so fast. And can you learn faster than your competitors is an interesting question.
Okay. Well, just to finish, Chris, because I don't want to take any more of your time, and you must be fed up with me by this time.
No problem. Well, thanks for having me.
I would like you to recommend any book or article or whatever that you think it's interesting to read, that has for some reason interested or enjoyed you, or you have had a good time reading it. Something that you can recommend.
Like a business book?
No, a business book or whatever, or literature book, or something that you think it's interesting that you have read recently.
Okay. So I'm going to give you two answers. So the first answer I'm going to give you, I guarantee you about 0.00001% of your audience will be interested in, but I loved it. So I read a book recently written by he's a engine. He develops engines for Formula One cars. So he's a very premium elite engine designer, and he wrote a book called The Secret Horsepower Race, and it's about aero engine development for fighter aircraft in Italy, America, UK, and Germany in the Second World War, and it's absolutely amazing. Now, if you have no interest in aeroplane, I love airplanes. I'm fascinated by airplanes. This book is amazing, but it's pretty niche. So
yeah, but anyway, sounds interesting.
Well,
it's a very unique recommendation.
It's very exactly. There you go.
I'm very grateful for that.
There you go. There you go. It's a very niche book, and I suppose novels. Well, it's a book I'm actually rereading. Anybody that knows me will have heard me talk about it. A book by an English author who actually died recently, a guy called John le Carré, who essentially invented the modern form of spy fiction. And his most famous book is a book called Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, which is an utterly astonishing piece of writing. So anybody that I would recommend that to absolutely anybody. I'm not. Yeah, it's just brilliant. I mean, it's so amazing that the language he created. He wrote that book in the 1970s, in the middle of the Cold War, or the end. Yeah, middle of the Cold War, and the language he invented essentially in the book is now the language that Secret Services all use, and they think it was all there, but it wasn't. It was the language he created in his book. I mean, talk about so that's pretty good going.
Yeah, it's reality imitating fiction.
Absolutely, exactly that. Exactly that. Mm-hmm. Exactly that.
Anyway, John le Carré is quite popular here in Spain too.
Is he? Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear. He's my favorite. I think he's probably my favorite author.
Yeah, but I'm sure not many people should have read that novel, and it's a good thing just to talk about it.
Good.
Okay, Chris. Thanks a million indeed.
Thank you. Lovely to meet you.